When a narcissistic woman meets a healed empath, the first thing that happens is not a conversation. It's a disturbance in the emotional field. She senses it before a single word is spoken. The healed empath no longer carries the restless energy of someone seeking approval or trying to be understood. There is no subtle tension, no hunger for validation, no unconscious invitation to be rescued or controlled. What stands in front of her is presence, quiet, grounded, and self-contained. And this presence speaks louder than any declaration of strength. From a psychological perspective, this is deeply unsettling to her. Narcissistic dynamics rely on unconscious signals, over-explaining, emotional availability without limits, the need to be chosen. The healed empath no longer broadcasts these signals. He has integrated his shadow, his fear of abandonment, his need to fix, his compulsion to sacrifice himself for connection. What remains is emotional coherence. Carl Jung described this as individuation. A person who has made peace with himself no longer leaks energy into the world unconsciously. She feels this immediately. His calm is not indifference, and his silence is not weakness. It is containment, and containment cannot be penetrated by manipulation. Where she expects emotional hooks, there are none. Where she expects curiosity mixed with insecurity, she finds clarity. This creates a subtle anxiety in her, because narcissistic control depends on emotional imbalance. Without imbalance, there is no leverage. What's most important here is that the healed empath is not trying to impress, convince, or protect himself. He is simply present. He listens without absorbing. He observes without internalizing. This mirrors something back to her that she cannot tolerate, a self that is whole without external validation. In Jungian terms, he has withdrawn his projections, and when projections collapse, reality becomes unavoidable. This moment sets the entire dynamic in motion. Everything that follows, the escalation, the withdrawal, the eventual rupture, begins here, in this silent recognition that the old games will not work. And the reflection to sit with is this: when you no longer need to be chosen, you become impossible to control, and that is where real power begins. Once that initial recognition has occurred, the dynamic moves into its next phase. Her familiar strategies are activated, almost automatically. This is not conscious cruelty, it is conditioned behavior. Narcissistic patterns are built around survival, not intimacy. She reaches for what has always worked: charm, intensity, emotional pressure, subtle guilt, sudden withdrawal, expecting the empath to lean forward, to overthink, to re-engage. But this is where the shift becomes unmistakable. Nothing lands. The healed empath does not argue with reality, nor does he try to correct her behavior. He recognizes the pattern without becoming entangled in it. When affection appears abruptly, he receives it without surrendering himself. When distance is introduced, he does not chase it away. This emotional neutrality is often misunderstood as coldness, but psychologically it is regulation. Jung would say the complex is no longer in charge, consciousness is. The empath has learned to feel without being ruled by feeling. For a narcissistic woman, this creates a disorienting gap. Her tactics depend on reaction, on emotional spikes and drops that restore her sense of control. But the healed empath no longer oscillates. He remains consistent, which removes the emotional feedback loop she unconsciously depends on. Without reaction, her behaviors lose their meaning. Manipulation requires participation, and she is no longer being invited into a familiar dance. What's crucial here is that the empath is not winning or trying to outplay her. There is no strategy. He is simply aligned with himself. He names what he sees internally without needing to announce it. He chooses responses rather than reactions. This subtle shift signals something profound. Access has changed. The emotional door that once swung open at the slightest touch is now selective, intentional. This often provokes escalation. She may intensify her efforts not out of desire, but out of confusion. The absence of control feels like rejection, even when none is intended. And yet the healed empath remains steady, not because he is detached, but because he is integrated. The reflection to carry forward is simple but demanding. When you stop reacting, you stop reinforcing the very patterns that once controlled you. And in that stillness, you reclaim authorship over your emotional life. When her familiar methods no longer produce the expected effect, something inevitable happens. The pressure increases. This is the point where effort replaces ease. What once felt instinctive now feels forced. The narcissistic woman begins to push harder, not because she suddenly wants connection, but because loss of control threatens the fragile structure of her self-image. Control, for her, is not dominance, it is emotional safety. And when that safety wavers, escalation follows. This escalation can take many forms. She may become more provocative, more vulnerable, or more accusatory. Old stories are rewritten, emotional intensity is amplified, and contradictions begin to surface. From a Jungian perspective, this is the ego fighting exposure. The persona, the carefully managed image, starts to crack when it is no longer reinforced by external validation. The healed empath, without intending to, becomes a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to those who rely on illusion. What's important is that the empath does not confront her directly. He doesn't accuse, diagnose, or attempt to wake her up. He simply remains clear. He responds to what is said, not to what is implied. He doesn't rush to soothe discomfort that isn't his to carry. This restraint does something profound. It removes the smoke screen. Without emotional rescue, her inconsistencies become visible, not just to him, but to herself. This is where exposure truly occurs, not through confrontation, but through contrast. His grounded responses highlight her emotional volatility. His consistency exposes her shifting narratives. His self-respect makes manipulation unnecessary and therefore obvious. Jung spoke of the shadow as what we refuse to see in ourselves. When someone else refuses to play along with our defenses, the shadow steps forward uninvited. At this stage, she may experience a surge of resentment or shame, often disguised as anger. The empath becomes distant, arrogant, or emotionally unavailable in her mind, not because he has changed, but because the illusion of control has collapsed. And illusion once seen cannot be unseen. The reflection to sit with is this: you do not need to expose anyone deliberately. When you live in alignment, truth reveals itself naturally, and integrity does the work that force never could. As this dynamic continues, something subtle but decisive takes place. The center of gravity shifts. The narcissistic woman is accustomed to being the emotional reference point. Conversations orbit her feelings, conflicts revolve around her reactions, and attention bends in her direction. But with a healed empath, this structure quietly collapses, not through confrontation, but through choice. He no longer organizes his inner world around her emotional state. This is where the power dynamic truly reverses. Power, in the psychological sense, is not control over another, it is sovereignty over oneself. The healed empath does not withdraw affection to punish, nor does he offer it to secure approval. He gives and withholds based on alignment, not fear. Jung would describe this as a shift from participation mystique to individuation. The empath steps out of emotional fusion and into conscious relationship. For the narcissistic woman, this is deeply destabilizing. She senses that she is no longer being prioritized in the same way, and yet there is no hostility to react against. The empath remains present, respectful, even kind, but not orbiting. This creates a vacuum. Her attempts to recentralize herself through emotion, drama, or urgency fail because urgency no longer governs his decisions. What makes this moment so difficult for her is that the empath's independence is not performative. He is not pulling away to provoke desire. He is genuinely anchored elsewhere, in his values, his inner life, his sense of purpose. This forces a confrontation with a painful reality. She is no longer the axis around which the relationship turns. And for someone whose identity depends on being central, this can feel like erasure. Yet from the empath's perspective, nothing dramatic has occurred. He has simply chosen coherence over chaos. He listens, but he does not lose himself. He engages, but he does not abandon his center. This quiet consistency sends a powerful message. Connection is welcome, but only if it does not require self-betrayal. The reversal is complete when she realizes that she is now responding to him, not the other way around. Her moods no longer set the tone. Her approval no longer defines his worth. And in that moment, the illusion of control dissolves. The reflection to carry with you is this: when you make yourself the center of your own life, relationships stop controlling you and start revealing who truly belongs. At this stage, a quieter but far more unsettling experience begins for her, an emotional absence she cannot name. Without the usual flow of attention, reassurance, or reactive energy, something inside her grows loud. The healed empath has not attacked, rejected, or humiliated her. He has simply withdrawn his function as an emotional regulator. And what remains is a space she has spent much of her life avoiding. Narcissistic structures are often built around external supply, validation, admiration, emotional intensity, because the inner world feels unstable or hollow. When that supply is interrupted, the psyche turns inward, and for her that inward turn is unfamiliar territory. Jung would describe this as the ego losing its supports. The persona can no longer perform because there is no audience willing to play along. And without performance, the underlying emptiness becomes difficult to ignore. This emptiness is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness implies a desire for connection. What she experiences instead is a sense of flatness, a lack of meaning, a dull anxiety that cannot be resolved by attention alone. The healed empath's holiness amplifies this contrast. His emotional self-sufficiency reflects back what she lacks, not as an accusation, but as a reality. What makes this moment especially painful is that the empath is not withholding out of cruelty. He remains available within healthy limits. He does not disappear or stonewall. He simply refuses to be consumed. This leaves her without a familiar enemy to fight against. There is no conflict to dramatize, no abandonment to protest. Only the quiet realization that something inside her has gone unfilled for a very long time. For some, this moment can become a doorway to self-awareness. But narcissistic defenses are designed to prevent exactly that. More often, the emptiness is projected outward. She may label him as boring, distant, or emotionally inadequate, not because he is, but because he no longer provides the stimulation that masked her inner void. From the empath's side, this phase requires restraint. It is tempting to rescue, to soothe, to fill the silence, but doing so would re-enter the old role. Healing means allowing others to feel what belongs to them. The reflection to sit with is this: when you stop filling the emptiness in others, you give them the chance, perhaps for the first time, to confront what only they can heal. Eventually, the dynamic reaches its quiet conclusion. When a narcissistic woman walks away from a healed empath, it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. There may be distancing, devaluation, or a sudden declaration that the connection no longer feels right. But psychologically, this departure is not a victory. It is a retreat. She leaves not because she has won, but because staying would require something she is unwilling or unable to give, self-confrontation. What she cannot tolerate is not rejection, but irrelevance. The healed empath no longer feeds the narrative that sustains her identity. He does not chase, plead, or attempt to restore the fantasy. His calm acceptance of the ending disrupts her internal logic. In Jungian terms, the complex loses its grip. The drama collapses because there is no longer an opposing force to energize it. And yet, this is where something lasting is formed. The healed empath becomes a psychological marker. He represents a relationship that did not revolve around control, volatility, or emotional hunger. This makes him difficult to forget, not because he was extraordinary in performance, but because he was ordinary in presence, stable, grounded, and whole. For someone accustomed to intensity as proof of connection, this steadiness leaves an imprint. She may move on quickly, seek new supply, or rewrite the story in ways that protect her ego. But beneath these defenses, a quiet comparison persists. Future relationships are unconsciously measured against what she encountered and could not dominate. The healed empath becomes a reminder, not of loss, but of a boundary she could not cross. From his perspective, there is no lingering need for closure. He grieves if necessary, reflects honestly, and continues forward. His growth does not depend on being remembered, and that is precisely why he is. Jung noted that what is not integrated returns as fate. The empath, having integrated his lessons, moves on freely. She, having avoided hers, carries the memory. This is not about triumph or revenge, it is about consequence. When someone meets you in your Holen, and cannot stay, they leave with an unresolved question that no distraction can fully silence. The reflection to leave with is this: when you choose healing over attachment, you may lose people, but you become unforgettable to those who were never ready to meet you fully